I give you that quote tonight. That is a dear man I've met on one occasion. His name is John Dominic Crossan. Dr. Crossan is a Christian theology professor and at a major college in England, or actually in Ireland, if you could pick up on the accent. He is a man who actually in state says that Jesus was never resurrected, that Jesus died on the cross. He goes far enough today to say that, you know what, they didn't even bury people who were crucified. So why would we take belief that Jesus was crucified? I use this introduction to start our next part of the series we're on. Last week we started a series called Who is Christ? Who is Jesus? And we started looking at last week on last Saturday night. I'm excited, actually, kind of pause. It's Sunday night. If I say Saturday night, I apologize. I'm kind of used to the Saturday night thing. But this is Sunday night. And last Saturday night, we talked about what the world thought of who Christ was. And it was kind of amazing, some of the opinions we had from people on an interview. This Sunday night, we're going to look at our challenges from inside the church. Last week, we looked at challenges outside the church to who Christ is. This week, the challenges are coming from inside our own body of Christianity. And there is a lot of things out there that is just completely ridiculous. Dr. Crossan, sweet man, wonderful man to talk to, does not believe in the resurrection. He's part of a thing coming up today called the Jesus Seminar. Some of y'all might have heard about it from time to time. It pops its little ugly head up every so often. And they say things like, well, Christ was never really resurrected. The historical Christ died on the cross. And that's the end of the story. That is one statement they make. There's other challenges within Christianity today, or within the fringes of Christianity, that say, you know what? We had just recently the whole movie thing about Jesus was Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene. They made a movie out of the book, Da Vinci Code. Yeah, they made this movie out of this, and there were people who were like, "Oh, well, that's for real. That's really what happened. Jesus got married, and his son somewhere out in the world, and on and on." And we have these people who believe this, and to make matters worse, some of these people are leaders within our churches today saying things like this. Joel Osteen, another pundit, if you will, makes a statement. At one point, he was on Larry King Live, and you can get this on YouTube. They ask him, point blank, what does he believe about Christ? And he says, well, and he grins that $20 million grin where he goes, he does that grin, he goes, well, Larry, I believe that there are many ways to get to heaven. That Jesus is my personal way. And he grins again, and Larry goes, so you don't believe that Christ is the only way to heaven? And Larry King quotes, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And he goes, and that works for me. But it might not work for the Muslim. It might not work for... This is a leader within Christianity today saying, you know what? Jesus isn't the only way to heaven. So we have a lot of challenges to what Christ is. So tonight, for just a few seconds, I want to look at what the disciples... Next week, we're going to look at what Jesus said about himself. Tonight, we're going to look at, in Mark, about what Jesus said about himself, or what the disciples said about Jesus. Kind of set this up. We're looking at Peter's confession in Mark. I really like to use... Last week, we looked at Peter in the book of Acts when he gave his sermon there at Pentecost. Tonight, we're going to look at Peter's answer to... a question Christ asked him. I use Peter a lot because I see Peter as kind of your everyday Joe. He's kind of the guy that shows up. Peter opens his mouth sometimes and stupid falls out. I love him to death, but Peter is my favorite disciple because he reminds me of me. Peter is real gung-ho to do something like, yeah, Jesus, when they're on the the Mount of Transfiguration, Peter looks at him and goes, hold on, we don't leave. We're going to build you a tent, you a tent, you a tent. We're just going to stay here forever. And by the time he gets done with this statement, the whole thing's over and he's missed the point. He reminds me a lot of me. Sometimes I get really excited about things and I look at it and I'm like, we're going to do this, this, and this. And then I realize, you know what? I've missed the boat. Peter's kind of that individual. But let's look at this. We're going to be in Mark chapter 8. We're going to start in verse 27. And the reason we're looking at Mark tonight specifically is Matthew, Mark, and Luke all tell this account. They all tell the same story. This is what they call the Synoptic Gospels. They're kind of a historical look. Next week when we talk about what Jesus says about himself, we're going to look at the book of John. That's a little bit of a different thing. It has some theology in it. But tonight we want to kind of look at a historical look, because that's what the challenge is about the historical Christ. So what does the scripture say? Verse 27, Jesus went out with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the road he asked the disciples, "Who do the people say that I am?" All right, stop for just a second. That has to be an interesting walk. They're walking along. There's probably some conversation going on. And Jesus point blank says, "Who does everybody say I am?" If I was one of the disciples, this is kind of that pop quiz moment. The disciples are probably walking with him, and they're like, whoa. How do we answer this right? So if you look at their answer here in verse 28, it's kind of funny. They give off everybody. He says, they answered him, "John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others one of the prophets." In Matthew, they actually go on and say Jeremiah. They start listing people. It's kind of like they think you're everybody, Jesus. You're John the Baptist. John was already dead, so they thought, he's until we're incarnated. They just kept giving. They gave all these answers. And Jesus walks on. I figure in my mind, I have this. Jesus goes, okay, kind of takes a few more steps, and he goes, verse 29. "But you," he asked them again, "who do you say that I am?" Pop quiz time. Who do you say that I am? You've been with me. It's kind of this thing. You've been with me for how many years now? Who am I? Who do you say I am? And Peter, I see this almost without missing a beat. Peter answers him, because there's not even a verse change here. Peter answers him and says, "You are the Messiah!" Exclamation point. Peter's excited. He's like, he knows the answer. It's like, y'all know, when I look towards some of our students, y'all know that kid in school that has the annoying answers, knows everything, that wants to be answered. They raise their hand pick me, pick me, pick me, pick me. I know in Miss York's class I did that sometimes because I thought it got me extra points. That's kind of what Peter was. Peter's like, "Oh, Jesus, pick me, pick me, pick me. I know the answer. You're the Messiah." Yeah. And Jesus, what does he do? He warns them to not. It says here in the very next verse, he says, "And he strictly warned them not to tell anyone about him." Stop. That's kind of weird. He just got a confession from one of the disciples who said, "You're the Messiah." And he says, "Don't you tell a soul." Now, why in the world would Jesus do this? Stop for just a minute and let's think. Jesus was the Messiah. The Jews were looking for the Messiah, but they were looking for someone who was going to be a ruler, going to be a king, going to overthrow the Romans, going to sit on David's throne literally and rule the world. They weren't looking for somebody who was going to die on the cross for their sins. What would they have done if they found out he was the Messiah? They would have forced him into power or killed him in the process. Because that's what happened with anybody before in history who tells them, "I'm going to be the Messiah." That's exactly why Jesus said, "Don't tell people. I don't want that." He didn't want people running around. And you know what? The disciples didn't even get this idea, because when Jesus goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, what happens? Y'all know the story. Peter probably. Somebody pulls out. Somebody is carrying a sword. One of the disciples. No time through the entire ministry of Jesus is there a need for a sword. And when they're at the Garden of Gethsemane, one of them pulls out a sword and lops the dude's ear off. They still had this idea that Jesus was going to be the Messiah of power, the ruler. So he strictly warned them not to do this. Let's go on here. Verse 31, he says, "Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed and raised after 3 days." All right. Dominic Crossan, who I'm camping on a little bit because he's one of the main people you see saying that Jesus never was resurrected, states that doesn't affect his Christianity. He said if they find the bones of Christ, his Christianity will be the same the day before as it was the day after. I don't know if I get this today, that people can say things like this about Christianity. Jesus was never resurrected. That's kind of our central point, if y'all haven't got that. Jesus died on the cross and he overcame death for us. Right here in Scripture, Jesus point blank tells them that he has to be killed and raised after 3 days. If we can point blank have people in our church that are saying that there is no such thing as a resurrection, and they can't